Hello overseers, are your ants all blocking each other as they attempt to grab material and process them into more advanced components? Well, in this video, we're going to go through some common issues and trail ideas that can help you unblock your ants and optimize your processing. This video will assume that you already have the basic knowledge of how to set up a trail to grab materials out of scrap piles, and how to put them into a stockpile, and how to use their dispenser to then turn those scrap materials into basic smelted materials, and then turn those smelted materials into some more advanced stuff like screws and plates. We'll largely be just using iron as an example for all of these trails and builds, but this does work with copper, glass, concrete, and all your more advanced materials in the early and mid game. We'll also be assuming that you have tipped your way up to the small digger ant at the very least, because that is how you will start getting materials out of these larger deposits instead of these temporary scrap piles. Once you've unlocked your small digger ants, you will need to make them out of your small worker ants. Good idea to just send them off an old trail into one of these assemblers, and then you just need to add a screw, and then they will turn your small workers into small diggers. The diggers are going to be able to mine your resources out of deposits rather than scrap. There's a couple of advantages to this. Obviously, the scrap is temporary, so you won't have to edit your trail as often once you set up your digging trails. So let's start with our very first trail of this video, and that's going to be the resource extraction trail out of deposits. Once you've unlocked your small digger ants, you'll have this new mining trail, and that's what we're going to start with. I'm going to be building all my trails on iron floor tiles, but you don't need to be doing this. You can just do it however you like, but I want to just be a little bit more clear in the video, so this will help us out a little bit. But you can just build this on regular floor, so don't worry about the iron floor tiles if you don't have enough resources to build them. We're going to use this iron deposit as an example, and how we're going to set up multiple trails so that your ants don't run into each other. The other main difference between mining from a deposit and mining from scrap is that you'll notice that scrap, they just instantly pick it up out of the scrap, but when they mine out of a deposit, it takes some time. Because it takes some time, you're not able to just put one mining trail across here, and you can't just put multiple mining points along here because they will just block each other as they attempt to mine. We need to set up some sort of parallel processing. So set up your mining trail like such. We're going to put some input nodes into each bit of the deposit. Now notice that you can have multiple entry points onto each deposit, so you can mine this deposit as many times as you can, as long as you see these little arrows go into the mining trail. Each one of these entry points will allow a separate ant to mine from them simultaneously. That way you can mine out this deposit a little bit quicker. To split the ants into the mining trail, a simple divider trail will suffice. I like to offset from my center point a little bit, and you'll see why in a second. So I'm just going to put it over here. Now you can make this trail a little bit more compact if you like. I'm just keeping it a little bit more spacious just for the visibility of the video. So this will get the input, and ants coming into this divider will now split into each of these 6 trails that I've set up over here. As for the output, we'll just use hauling trails, and we're going to get all the output to a singular point over here, and then that's going to then link back into the divider, so once they've dropped off their material, they can go and pick one of these trails. We're going to link the output of each one of these trails into this central point. And now our ants should be able to come in, select the trail, do their mining, which takes some time, and when they're done, they can come out and drop off their stuff. So you will need a stockpile near your output, something like this. Then you will need to input your ants somewhere. So I've got my little digger ants over here, so I'm going to set up a null trail over here and bring them in. As you can see, as the ants come in through here, they distribute themselves along these 6 trails and they start mining. You can see the mining does take some time. And once they're done, they will all go over here and deposit their scrap. And the process will just loop and repeat itself. And that's pretty much a simple mining trail. Now I want you to remember this concept of an input distributor and an output sort of point that they all go to drop off their material, because these concepts are going to apply to all the future trails that we build. Now it is worth noting, it's a little bit out of scope of this video, but to optimize this trail, you probably want to put a counter gate of however you're sending the ants over here, just to keep as many ants on these trails as you have. So there's no point sending like 10 ants onto this trail because you only got 6 points for which they can mine. So you can just make sure you have a counter gate that only sends 6 ants. As you can see, a 7th ant coming into these 6 trails will have no additional sort of benefit. You could probably have 1 extra ant so that they can continuously be mining, but if you have too many ants over here, you're going to get diminishing returns. They're just going to be queuing up and waiting and not doing anything. So just make sure you have the correct amount of ants set to your trails using counter gates. Bit of out of scope of this video. And the other reason why I like to have a singular trail rather than multiple trails is because from this point, it's very easy to now pull an old gate back out of here and repurpose all of these ants as they get old and die. You can obviously turn these digger ants into big digger ants. If you have this technology unlocked, you can turn them into digger ants, or you can just send them into a recycler and recoup some of your iron back for the cost of making these digger ants. But that's a little bit out of scope of this video. Let's continue with our next trail. Our next step, obviously, once you have your basic scrap iron, is to smelt that iron into iron blocks, or just iron. Now, this thing that you see here is just a single one, but at some point you're definitely going to need more than one of these. So how do we create a trail that can allow parallel processing of these smelters? I'm going to use 4 smelters in my example, but this thing should apply to however much you want to scale up to. So we'll just drop 4 smelters over here first. And then we can figure out how we want to divide these ants into the smelters. Now we can think of our processes as 2 distinct types of processes. You've got your one-to-one processes, as in, for example, if you have a smelter or pretty much any smelting recipe, they take in 1 iron scrap and they output 1 smelted iron. Later on, you'll have other processes, such as the ones that make iron plates or light bulbs. They make 1 iron plate, but they require 4 iron. So I'll go through a build for that a bit later, but let's focus on our 1 input processes first. Using the same concept of an entry and exit point, I'm going to set my entry point here, and then we're going to get it to go to each one of these spots. Then from here, we're going to get a hauling trail to get to an exit point, and that exit point will link back into the entry point. Something like this. Once that's done, we just need to set ourselves a little stockpile over here. Make sure that they can all access the stockpile from the exit point by observing these arrows over here. We will set this to only accept iron blocks, and now we just need to link our dispenser from our iron over here. With our dispenser linked to the iron, they should distribute to each of these smelters, smelt their thing, and then come over here, drop off the smelted product over into this stockpile, and then continue and distribute evenly. Let's see how that works out by grabbing a few ants onto the trail. Now, once again, once you have your counter gate out, you want to set the amount of ants equal to the amount of machines you have. So in this case, we just want 4 ants. You can automate this with a counter trail. But for now, we'll just set the ants over here manually and see how they distribute themselves amongst this machine. So we can see they distribute themselves perfectly into each machine. They will smelt their product and then they will put them into this stockpile. You can see they all function perfectly, and once they've dropped their material off, they'll redistribute themselves into the smelters once again. And I've just done this trail like this for visibility, but you can compact this trail as much as you want. Now you might be asking, how do I modify this trail in case I have multiple different stockpiles with iron? So you can easily fit more dispensers everywhere. So for example, if I had another iron stockpile somewhere else, such as this one, we can just simply grab another dispenser and we can put it over here. If you only have 2 dispensers, this works out fine, but you probably can't fit a 3rd dispenser in here. So if you need to have 3 or even 4 dispensers for whatever reason, you can just extend this part of the trail. So you can get a hauling trail out here and then just put this along all of your dispensers. That way they will come out here and grab it from whichever dispenser has iron. In case you have like even more dispensers for whatever reason, you can just put them along here. It will make the trail a little bit longer, but if that's the need that you have to have multiple dispensers, you can very easily modify this trail to accommodate that. So once again, this trail is going to work for all of your processes that require 1 input. For example, all of your smelting processes. as well as a lot of your workshop processes as well, like screws only need one thing, wires, fabric, it'll work for all of that. So you can just use this trail. It's nice and compact, easy to build. But let's talk about the slightly more complicated trail, which is to make stuff like iron plate. So once again, I'm going to set down an example with 4, but we can have as many as you want. And I'll talk about the scalability of this at the end of the video. But essentially, if we have 4 of these and we change them all to make a product like iron plate, which takes multiple inputs, we can figure out a trail together that will optimize this process. Now, the first thing that we need to do is essentially put our dispenser next to each one of these, because the difference between here and here is that this ant needs to do loops to deliver 4 blocks into here before it starts processing for a plate. For our example, we're making plates, so we need some iron blocks. So find your iron block stockpile and start putting down a few dispensers. Because we need to deliver multiple iron blocks per workshop, we need to set down as many dispensers as we have workshops right next to it. The next step will be to get a trail so that it can pick up an iron block and drop it at the workshop and repeat. So I'm going to use a hauling trail and I'm going to build a tiny little triangle next to it for that process. The next step, once we've delivered the iron blocks into here, is that we need to get the iron plate out. So to do that, we're going to need the help of one of our other gates. Over on the left-hand side of the development tree, after you've unlocked fabric, you'll see this carry gate. It's a logic gate that lets ants enter based on what type of material they're carrying. We can use this to our advantage and say set a carry gate off the end of each of these over here. Now this trail may look a little bit messy, but just bear with me here. And we can set each of these carry gates to look for if they're carrying iron plate, sorry. So once you've set the carry gates, what's going to happen is they're going to loop around this little triangle over here, dropping iron blocks into the workshop. Once enough blocks are in here and they start crafting the iron plate, once they finish crafting the iron plate, they're going to be on this node and they're going to decide whether they want to come back here and grab more iron blocks in here or whether they can get out of this carry gate. And because they're carrying the iron plate, they will be able to exit out of this carry gate. So this carry gate needs to go to an exit point. So we can get a hauling trail out of each carry gate, and I know it looks a little bit confusing because there's nowhere else for me to get this out besides through here, but don't worry, just skip over this node, it won't interact with it, and just bring them all out first. Now once they're all out, we need to bring them to an exit point. So the exit point is going to be, say, here, and I'm going to do it a little bit further back for clarity, but once again, you can condense this trail a lot more once you know what's going on. And once they're at an exit gate, they need to now go to an entry gate. Now you might think a divider would work, and it might work, but we want a more robust solution, so we're going to use a counter gate instead of a divider. So you can put counter gates onto each of these entrance points, and that's going to more accurately divide your ants. You might need to work around some of this a little bit, so make sure you get hauling trails in there. The 4 counter gates we've set up here essentially works as a divider, but it ensures that there's only 1 ant on each of these trails. And that's important because you don't want the ant to go on here while it's doing loops trying to deliver the iron blocks. So with that set up, we can set some ants onto this trail. So you want to input your ants from here. Again, from wherever your ants are spawning, make sure you have the correct amount of ants. There's no point having more ants than machines. So here I just want 4 ants. So I'm just going to grab the 4 ants from here. And they're going to go over here. And we can see how this works. So you can see they're going to go through each of these counter gates and distribute themselves amongst each of these machines. Now the ant is going to do loops until this machine fills up, because this carry gate is denying them exit out of here until they're carrying whatever desired material that you want, in this case the iron plate. Now after these ants have finished crafting their things, we can see they're running around with their iron things because I haven't put down a stockpile, but this very clearly shows that the carry gate allows the ant to pass through out of the system when they've finished crafting the material that you want. So now we can just simply put down another stockpile, and then you can see they'll drop off and redistribute themselves again. they'll drop off their iron plate, and then they'll go back to doing their first job of hauling these blocks into these machines and crafting new iron plates, and the loop continues. Now let's quickly talk about what happens if you have multiple different dispensers. So if you have, say, 2 different sources of iron blocks, for example here and here, well, that's very easy to handle in this case because we already have multiple dispensers on each loop. So you can just very easily replace one of the dispensers with a dispenser from a different area if you want to divide where your input is coming from. Much easier to do than this. You don't even need to make any modifications to the trail at all. You just have to change the dispensers to their different sources. Now let's talk about how you would calculate some of your ratios. For example, how many smelters do you need if you have 6 mining trails collecting scrap iron? And how many smelters do you need to support 4 of these workshops making iron plate? The game does a really terrible job of trying to tell you how many of everything you need in ratio to each other, so we have to just make a guess. The easiest way to do this is sort of ignore the walking time and the picking up time of stuff and the trail distance, assuming you have really tight trails like this, and that will all even out. We can just look at the mining time itself. So for example, if you pick up one of these guys when they finish mining, or this guy that's about to start mining, we can have a look at what it's doing, and you can see the mining takes roughly 15 seconds. So let's just assume every 15 seconds one of these trails is going to produce one of these scrap irons. Now you can sort of look at how long does it take to smelt one of these. As this ant comes over, it's going to drop that in and start smelting, and we can see that it takes 10 seconds to smelt. So the ratio here is roughly 3:2, ignoring walking time. So you would need 1.5 of these trails to support one of these smelters continuously if you had that one source, right? If all of these smelters are supported by this one stockpile, you would need 6 trails to 4 of this to continuously produce iron blocks. Similarly, we can have a look at this. It takes 10 seconds to smelt an iron block. And how long does it take to craft one of these plates? I believe looking at this bar, it's roughly a minute to craft one of these plates. So it needs 4 of these blocks every single minute. Given that one of these smelters can roughly create 6 of these blocks, ignoring walking time, once again, because the walking time is going to cancel out between this walking time, you're going to roughly get one of these can support like 1.5 of these. That's just a rough way to calculate how many you need. So if you're going to turn all 4 of these blocks into plates, if that's what you wanted to do, you would go, each one of these can support 1.5 of these. So 4 of these can probably support around 6 of these. Similarly with screws, I think you can look at the time it takes to create a screw. If I chuck one ant onto here, so we get it to make the screws over here. We can see it roughly takes around 10 seconds as well. So the smelt to screw ratio is roughly 1:1. You can do the same calculation later on with all your different materials like fabric, light bulb, and wire to just get a really rough off-the-cuff calculation of how many mining trails you need for, say, copper to copper wire to smelting to actually assembling the wire, or how to make glass into light bulbs and things like that. The last thing I wanted to mention before we close out the video for these basic trails is scalability. Now, in my experience, having sets of 4 of these is going to be more than enough to get you through the early and mid game, but we can see that these trails aren't too scalable for much more than that. So for example, if you wanted, say, 10 smelters in a line, then if you try to use this same pattern, here's what's going to happen. Let's get a divider from an entrance over to each one of these, and then you'll get your hauling trails back from each of these to some sort of exit point back into a divider. And what you're eventually going to notice is that these end ones have much higher travel time than the ones in the middle, and that may or may not become a problem as you scale past this volume. So I would recommend that if you do need to build another block of this, you just do another module like this next to it with its own individual dispenser and stockpile. If having multiple stockpiles is not a problem for you, which generally it's not a problem to have multiple stockpiles. You could probably extend this to up to like 6 per block, but any more than that, you're going to have this problem where your trails just become too long for it to do an efficient loop. Like for it to get to this outer one, it's going to have to walk all the way up there, down there, back here. It's not good. The other thing that you can possibly do is try to wrap this around the center point. So instead of building it in a line, you build it in a circle around here. Then your trail would look something like this, where you've got a central exit point and a central entry point, and they have roughly even trails where not, like I built it a little bit more spread out than it needs to be. As you can see, you can compress this a little bit more, but just for visibility purposes, with something like this, you can have a much more even set of trails for your 10 things if you just brought them all in a little bit closer to one another. But that's for you guys to explore. I would personally prefer just to have multiple modules like this and just really tight trails just to make the processing a little bit more efficient. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of other trails and methods that you can do that I haven't thought of. This is once again tailored for your early and mid game. So hopefully these two main trails that we've shown will help you a lot out with those things. Later on, you will have much more cooler tech to deal with trails, and I haven't got to it yet, so I can't help you. Things like the slinger, but you will need to tech up to that. The slinger seems very promising. It's a handy device that can throw materials, so that will probably solve a lot of these issues where you've got ants needing to go back and forth. You can probably just get them to throw the material and just grab the next material out of here. It will again change your build a lot. And I'm sure there's other things as you progress past Iron Worker Ant in the tech tree that will probably change the way that you build these trails. But for the early and mid game, especially when you're dealing with copper, glass, and all of those basic products, using trails like this and this should get you through the mid and early game. If you've learned something from this video, don't forget to leave a like and sub, and I will see you all in the next video. If you're looking for something to watch in the meantime, I have a Let's Play series on my channel. You can feel free to check that out.